I don't know if you noticed that as you were talking, I was blushing. Perhaps you didn't see it through my black skin. The cells are not perceptive enough. I have a difficulty in coming to the press and saying to them, this is how our system works, and because I expect each and every one of you to know exactly how we work and what we do. But having said that, I should remind you that during our huge fight with the ANC between 2007 and last year, I was extremely disappointed at our media. Journalists would go and interview, for example, Mr. What do you call the ANC spokesperson? Jackson Campbell. And Jackson would say a few things that were not true. But the journalist would faithfully take that down without asking serious questions. And they would reproduce Mr. Mthembu's comments. And I would worry, why didn't this journalist ask this? Why didn't he say, but Mr. Mthembu, this is not how the system works. None of that was done. And the obvious answer at that time was that journalists didn't know their own system.
Can you please give a practical example of that?
Sorry, everything I say will have, if I have to give the specifics, I would have to go back to the records. But for example, Mr. Mthembu would say the Press Ombudsman is biased in favor of the press because he is a press person. And if you go to our rulings, they are on our website, you will realize that 2/3 of the rulings are in favor of the complainants, and only 1/3 is in favor of the press. I mean, that's just statistics from looking at our history. So once a person says the press council is biased in favor of the press, the obvious question is, how many cases have you looked at, and what are the ratios from those cases? None of that was asked. And we have mentioned this a few times in our quarterly reports to the editors, and we have said these are the statistics. In fact, I think a time has now come where editors are getting extremely uncomfortable, and they're trying to question the credibility of the system. They are saying that the Press Ombudsman is bending over backwards to satisfy the ANC, and therefore the rulings are against the press. Again, as I say, we need to look at objective evidence before we can make such sweeping statements. Now, when we completed the review of the Press Council and our entire system, it was a 2-3 year review that we did. Again, in response to what the ANC was alleging starting from its 2007 Polokwane conference. When we ended that review, we realized that we need to do two things. One, talk to people inside the industry to get them to understand their system. And B, we need to be out there in the public getting people to understand the system. And because of that, we created the position of director in the Press Council. And that is my responsibility. Going out, talking to people, talking to journalists, talking to various organizations outside, and saying to them, this is who we are, and this is how we function. Now, very briefly, I hope you all have copies of this booklet with you now. If you don't, please pick it up from the counter there. First, let me tell you about the new system that we have created. We have moved away from a system of self-regulation, press regulation, self-regulation, to a system of independent co-regulation. There's a very subtle difference there. The new system was designed by the industry itself. So it still falls under the category of self-regulation, in that it's the press that designed this new system, and it is the press that in fact is responsible for the functioning of this system. But the difference between the old system and the new one is that it is a system where the public has a bigger voice in the running of our affairs. If you turn to page 6 of this booklet, you will see the members of the new Press Council. You've got 6 press representatives and 6 public representatives. And the Press Council is chaired by a retired judge. And we are fortunate to get the former Deputy Judge President of KwaZulu-Natal to be in charge of the system. He is the chairperson of the Press Council. Now, if you do the mathematics, you will realize that the non-industry voice is bigger than the industry voice in the Press Council. Now, we arrived at this system after we had had inputs from various organizations, various individuals. The inputs were made to the Press Council's review team, as well as to the Press Freedom Commission. The drama during those hearings was, why don't you allow for representation to come from various categories of our society? For example, have a seat for the religious community, have a seat for lawyers, have a seat for trade unions within the Press Council. And in the end, we decided it's much more democratic to allow every South African the ability to apply for a position as a member of the Press Council. They don't necessarily have to belong to a trade union or belong to a church group or to a religious group. As long as they are South Africans, and they are interested in media freedom, they are interested in the quality of our journalism, they could apply. The 6 press members were nominated by various press associations like PDMSA, SANEF, AIP, as you can see them listed there. The 6 public members were selected by an appointments panel, which again was headed by a retired judge, Judge Yvonne Mokoro, formerly of the Constitutional Court. She sat with 2 public members and 2 press members to look at the applications, to shortlist the applicants, to interview the applicants, and finally arrive at these 6 people. The judge was nominated, was suggested, recommended by the Chief Justice of the country. So this system is in fact independent in that sense. And it is co-regulation in the sense that it is the press and the public. But it specifically excludes government in any of its business. If you look at the next page, you will see a panel of adjudicators. Now this panel has got 8 public representatives and 6 press representatives. The public representatives were appointed in exactly the same way as the members of the Press Council. And again, we're very fortunate to have Judge Mokweng recommend Judge Bennett Mwebe. Again, very eminent jurist. Now, those of you who have been able to look at some of Judge Mwebe's decisions, you will see the amount of effort he puts into those judgments. There was a complaint that previously the judge was rather perfunctory when he looked at applications for leave to appeal. But Judge Mokweng is very thorough, and in his decision he is very thorough in explaining why he has arrived at his decision. Again, the public voice is bigger than the industry voice. Now, having done that, it's very fortunate. I presented this to the cabinet, led by Deputy President Khalima Matlanthe, and they were quite happy with the changes that we had effected. In fact, they have promised us that when the parliamentary hearings do happen next year, they will be fulfilling a mandate from the Mangaung conference to hold hearings on regulation, press regulation. But it will be merely a formality because they think that we have met some of the things that they had problems with under the old system. Go to the next page and you will see the people in the office. Starting at the bottom, the public advocate. This is a new position altogether. Latifa Mubarak here's a ghost to what I was told this man is in Woza.
When they told me you were coming, I said.
Latifa's role is a very interesting one. She is in fact a champion of the complainant. That's her role. She receives all the complaints and she sifts through them. If somebody sends a complaint saying, I didn't receive my copy of report, my subscription is...
You would even call her for that.
we get hundreds of these. I haven't received one about report, but City Press, yes. But we do get hundreds of them. As I say, these are very simple. She just writes back to say, please write to the publication.
Managers are responsible for this before your council.
But then she gets the more serious complaints from the readers. And her responsibility is to assist the complainant to formulate the complaint. And then she goes to the editor and she says, I represent so-and-so, who is your reader. And this is our complaint. Can we settle it amicably in the next 14 days? Latifa is given 15 days to resolve matters with editors. If she cannot resolve the matter with an editor within 15 days, the complaint is then escalated to the Ombudsman, Johan Latif. And once it reaches Johan's desk, it follows the normal processes of adjudication. One thing I should mention about Latifa's role is that we were very concerned by the arms race that was happening in the Ombudsman's office. It was a veritable arms race. The complainant would come with an attorney, and the publication would respond with an advocate. And the next time we would have a senior advocate on the one side and then have a senior advocate on the other. And the costs were astronomical. Lawyers make money. And they were making money out of a system that was designed to be as cost-effective as possible. Now that Tim is here, I'm still worried that Media 24 publications are still using batches of lawyers, even when we have said we are discouraging the use of lawyers. So the argument at the end of it was the people who come to complain don't know anything about the media. They're just innocent bystanders who know nothing. And if you rob them of the right to consult lawyers, you are in fact emasculating them. And it was as a result of that we created the position of public advocate, designed to ensure that the system is as cost-effective as possible. The less we use lawyers in the system, the better for everybody involved. The Ombudsman, the first thing that he does is he looks at the complaint that the public advocate brings through. He then asks the publication to respond to the public advocate. Now, one once he is satisfied that he knows what the issues are and he can come to a decision, he then makes a decision without having to have a hearing. Now, this is one area where there has been some controversy. Why is it that in one matter there is a hearing and in another matter there is no hearing? Ultimately, it depends on the Ombudsman's reading of the documents in front of him. If he can make a decision on the basis of the documents, he will make that decision. But if there are some intricacies that require a hearing, he will hold a hearing. And when he does hold the hearing, he sits with one member of the public from the panel of adjudicators and one press member. And the three of them hear the evidence and they come to a decision. And decisions at that forum are by majority vote. If the complainant, in this case it's Latifa representing the complainant, or the publication is unhappy with the decision of the Ombudsman, they have a right to apply for leave to appeal to Judge Mwebe. Both the complainant as well as the publication can apply to Judge Mwebe and say, we'd like leave to appeal. Again, he looks at the record at the Ombudsman's office and he might say, there is a chance that you might succeed, so we will have an appeal hearing. Or he might say, your chances of success are very limited, so we will not have an appeal hearing. And ultimately, our system rests on the decision of Judge Mwebe. And you cannot have a much more senior person than Judge Mwebe. So when publications complain that the decisions of the Ombudsman are biased, he is bending over backwards to satisfy the complainants, they haven't used the system the way it's supposed to be used. The reason we have a judge at the top is we're trying to get a very objective view of what we do. And we don't believe that anything can be much more objective than Judge Mwebe or than a judge of the Supreme Court. So ultimately, this system is independent, it is co-regulatory. But the beauty of it is that it's a system designed by the press itself. Now, if you go to the South African Constitution, you will see excerpts on page 13. Section 16 says, everyone has the right to freedom of expression, which includes freedom of the press and other media. Anybody can take a piece of paper, scribble on it, photocopy it, distribute it, and that person is exercising his freedom of expression and freedom of the media. Anybody can go to his Twitter account and send out a message. This is what our Constitution guarantees us, freedom of expression. And the limitations on freedom of expression are very specific. We will not propagate for war. We will not incite imminent violence, and will not advocate hatred that's based on race, ethnicity, gender, or religion, and that constitutes incitement to cause harm. Very clearly defined. Of course, there are other laws in the country that limit this freedom. But if you were to aggregate them, you will see that these are laws that are designed to ensure that you don't use your freedom of expression and violate other people's freedom. Other people's rights. That's the bottom line. We are free to say whatever we want to say, however we want to say it, as long as we don't violate other people's rights. That is South African law. Now, if the government imposes a media appeals tribunal or gets involved in any way in regulating the media in ways that go beyond what is in this constitution, that's where we need to stand up and say, this far and no further. We are entitled to freedom of expression, and it is guaranteed in the Constitution. It is in the Bill of Rights. If the state says this is what you may publish and that is what you may not publish, it is violating the country's constitution. That is why it is very important that the decisions on what is published and what is not published are left to the newsrooms. No outside agency. And that would explain why we had this huge standoff with the ANC over the Media Appeals Tribunal. Now, if you look at our press code, the very opening sentence is particularly interesting. The press exists to serve society. Now, if a Gwede was to tell the press that this is their responsibility, we would tell him, you can't tell us what to publish or what not to publish. But we voluntarily decided that we want to serve society. All the 1,000+ publications that subscribe to this code have committed themselves to serving society. It's voluntary, and therefore it is in line with our press freedom regime. We have said that our work will be guided at all times by the public interest. Now, each one of you here has committed yourself to that everything you do, all the decisions you make, will be guided by the public interest. And the public interest is defined here as being information of legitimate interest or importance to citizens. We've all committed ourselves to that. And each one of us has committed himself or herself as per the final sentence in this preamble. As journalists, we commit ourselves to the highest standards of excellence to maintain credibility and keep the trust of our readers. This means always striving for the truth, avoiding unnecessary harm, reflecting a multiplicity of voices in our coverage, showing a special concern for children and other vulnerable groups, and acting independently. That's a commitment that each one of us has made. If you didn't make it directly, Media 24 made it for you when they subscribed to this code. Now, if we believed and we actually lived what is in this preamble, there would be very few complaints coming to our office. Because there is a philosophical foundation to each one of our decisions. The preamble explains why we are journalists and what we should do as journalists. So you don't even have to go into the rest of the code. Every time you do a story, you will ensure that it meets these standards, these values. I walk into a room and I find two gentlemen with a bottle of brandy between the two of them. And the brandy is at 500 milliliters. And I asked them, how much brandy is there in the bottle? And the one says it is half empty, and the other says it is half full. Both of them are giving me hard facts. The bottle is at 500 milliliters. But in addition to that, they are telling me something about themselves and their values. The one who says it is half full is probably telling me that he is a social drinker. When the liquor is there, he will drink. But if it's there, he won't mind. The one who says it is half empty is probably an alcoholic who is already panicking about where the next drink is going to come from. Every time I read a publication, it tells me about the individual journalist's values, and it tells me about the publication's values, what is important for them. And as an industry, we have spelled out very clearly what is important to us. The code is quite simple, 12 sections, easy to remember. If I were to wake you up in the middle of the night and say, what does section 8 of the code say? You should be able to recite it. I'm an optimist.
Social drinker.
But ultimately, it is quite easy to leave this code. It is merely translating our values into practice. Our stories will be truthful, will be accurate, will be balanced, will be fair, will be in context. That's, to use the American cliche, apple pie and motherhood, or motherhood and apple pie, whatever this is. That's the reason why we are in journalism, because we believe we can deliver on the things that are in this code. I just point to one or two areas. We get very frequent complaints about 2.5 of the code. I was not contacted for a comment on this story. And journalists have a very interesting way of ensuring that they send the list of questions 2 hours before their deadline. And they will say there was no response to our questions. And yet it's so obvious that the person you are writing about needs to have enough time. I'm sorry, I switched off my clock. Please keep me.
How much more do you need? 5 minutes?
Yeah, another 5 minutes. Please, every time you write anything negative about anybody, ensure that they have a chance to respond. And ensure that they have been given enough time to collect whatever evidence they want to put to you. What is reasonable time? How long is a piece of string? You should be able to say, if I was in this position, I would be able to respond in 2 days' time. Because it's a very subjective question that the person can answer immediately. I will give him the 2 hours. So you need to be very reasonable in the time that you allocate. Another area that is very controversial is Section 11, confidential and anonymous sources. South Africa is regressing. We are going back to what we were during the days of apartheid, where I couldn't talk to you because I didn't know if you're a police informant. I couldn't talk to my wife, and I have to keep everything bottled inside me. We are fast moving back to that period. People are clamping down. They are scared they will lose the tenders. They are scared they will lose the deployment that they got after a huge struggle. It's become a closed society. But fortunately for us, people are still prepared to talk to us on condition we don't use their names. And of course, the press code respects the worldwide tradition. We will not reveal the sources of our information to anybody except our editor. Always remember, except our editor. The editor is the person who will say, yes, you may go with an unnamed source in your story. So he should know, he should evaluate whether to use that story or not. But we're saying, while we are protecting our sources, we should corroborate our stories. I remember I once had a problem with Matata when he was still editing City Press, where the ANC accused him of distorting what happened at an NEC meeting. And we jumped up and down. And in the end, I ruled against Matata. And he took the matter on appeal, and Judge Zulman ruled in his favor. But what he had done at the time was he had gone to his political staff and said, over the weekend, I got this information. I want each one of you to go to your sources and check whether this information is correct or not. And each one of the reporters came back with their version of what had happened from their sources. And the story ultimately was a collage of all the responses that he had received. So in this case, Judge Zulman said the publication went out of its way to corroborate the information. Now this is an example of the type of corroboration that can stand. In any case, before I lose my friendship with Matata, I didn't find him guilty of not corroborating his story. I said the way the story was shaped was in favor of one version of what had happened. And so in that sense, it wasn't a balanced story. But this is becoming particularly important as we're getting more and more stories. I mean, pick up your newspaper today, look at the number of stories where sources have not been named. They are on the increase. But we need to maintain our credibility. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. Just say on the matter of your references to Media 24, and I think that you and I haven't canvassed any views from editors, but I have a fair feeling of what's going on. We believe in the system. We consider ourselves co-creators of the system. We are stakeholders, and we think the system is fine. But we need to work a little bit around the conventions, how it actually functions. It's a little bit like a new house. We are all moving into a new house. There are new house rules, but there's also a culture in how the house rules are applied. And if you talk about the fact that lawyers, continue to represent Media 24 at the Ombudsman hearings, that's a convention that we must talk about. And I think those processes are underway. At some point, we're going to sit down and we will talk this thing through, and we will make this work because it's worth our while, and it's very important for all the reasons that we mentioned here this afternoon. Are there any questions? We have time for about a couple of questions. Arya, and then School.
Well, Joe, thank you very much for a very informative talk. I hope that your experience made more journalists or social drinkers than alcoholics. Just two quick questions. There's a kind of, I don't know if it's a myth or if there's something, a common belief going around that 24 hours is adequate time for comment. Do you actually know where that comes from? And I mean, do you view 24 hours on a, let's say, a complicated kind of story as enough? And would there be space to put that actually in writing? Because I do think it's a useful rule of thumb, and which I use in our newsroom. And secondly, you've referred to anonymous sources. Is there any other very common mistake that you pick up that you can maybe highlight to the journalists here today in our reporting?
Educate the new editor of the Bill.
The 24 hours, I don't know where that comes from. That person might be out of town, and you send your questions into cyberspace, and that person doesn't get to see those questions. So ultimately, you have to ensure that this person has received the message the questions, and to ensure that you have given him enough time to check with his department and make sure that he's got all his ducks in a row before he responds to you. So it will be longer than 24 hours, shorter than 24 hours. It, as I say, it depends on the circumstances. But you have to be reasonable as a journalist. If you're asking me, did you beat up do you beat up your wife? It's something that I'll react to immediately. I don't have to go and consult before I respond.
Say yes.
If it's, we believe that 30 policemen in your department are facing charges of assault. That person has to go and investigate that information, and you don't know how long it's going to take that person. But give them a reasonable time to go and get that information and ensure that they are working on a response to you. You follow up your email with a phone call to say, are you working on it? How long should I wait for a response from you? Those are things those practical things that you should be able to think of yourself.
What about the deliberately delaying response? There's not good on the other side, but deliberately not responding.
Yeah, we are aware that that's a mechanism that some people use to avoid publicity. Once you have given them a reasonable amount of time to respond, you can then write a story and say, on this day we sent an email, on this day we phoned, on that day we did this. He said it would be delivered. As I say, a diary of it in your story or when you present your defense to the Ombudsman, that will be useful. But you do that after you have exhausted the possibilities.
It's good.
What was the other question about?
Do you see there's any other serial offense that we
Look, as I say, our major one stems from the fact that people say we were not, we were not asked for comment. The story was from anonymous sources and they were given a particular version that is not true. So it all boils down to it's not accurate. It's as simple as that. So we need to double check our stories and say, is it correct?
It's good, and then also.
But in very simplistic terms, usually when they look at you when you go and get a lawyer for yourself, we generally believe that you've got something to hide. So this tendency of these publications, as you mentioned, of bringing the battery of lawyers, doesn't it create an impression that maybe they are somehow related or they are trying to replace something that they are trying to hide? And secondly, to follow up, just a bit of a follow-up on Andrew's question about the time for responses. How do you circumvent cases where people tend to master the art that Tim was just speaking about? Like I used to, I'll make a personal example. There was this person who was usually involved in the controversial stories, and he had mastered the art of usually to try to himself from returning calls and stuff like that. But he usually made it a point that he would return the calls at that time. Like after I've been trying to read messages and do everything that you're supposed to do, and then after midnight they will call and say, yeah.
Once you have a training of the number of calls you made, whatever you did to ensure that you got all of this guy, the SMSs you sent through, all that is evidence in your favor when the matter comes up. All we want proof of is that you made an effort to get hold of the person, and therefore the inference is that that person was deliberately avoiding you. And we can make that influence. It's quite easy. The other question was Betsy of lawyers. My feeling is that this entire system is a journalistic process. It's not a legalistic process. When you publish, there is a reason why you publish a story. You have thought through all the implications of publishing that story. And you should be able to rattle off all those reasons why you published it, why you believed the story was right. So you don't need a lawyer to come in and interpret your journalistic work. It's absolutely unnecessary. We as journalists should be able to say, in terms of the code, this is what I did, and this is how I did it, and take your chance on that one. Now, the judge comes in where you think that the ombudsman was mad in his decision. He should have accepted your reason for that decision. So ultimately, we don't need this Betsy of lawyers. But if you look at I can't find it quickly enough, the use of lawyers. It's on page 21. It says legal representation shall not be permitted unless the ombudsman or chair of appeals and all the other parties consent. So there must be agreement amongst all the participants. And it all depends on the nature of the questions of law raised by the complaint, the complexity of the dispute, the public interest, and the comparative ability of the opposing sides to deal with the dispute. So the idea is to limit the use of lawyers. Now I should mention that this section, in fact, is taken straight from the CCMA Act, which has come under attack, and we are watching the results of that appeal. Once the Constitutional Court changes this, this section will also obviously change. But the idea is this is a very simple system designed for journalists and readers, and we can solve our problems without spending so much money on that.
Well, you can close with your question.
Okay. What is your view or your stance on the use of social media as a form of official comment? I'm seeing an increasing number of stories which include now tweets or status updates or WhatsApp status updates as the almost official comment from the subject. What would your advice be, or what would you warn us against with regards to that?
It's interesting that you should raise this. At the SANEP conference on Saturday, there was a recommendation by SANEP that the Press Ombudsman's work should extend to the social media operations of publications that are already subscribed to the code. In other words, a journalist on build should be able to know what the code says and be able to manage his tweets in terms of what the code says. We haven't reached that point yet. It's still something that is being worked out by some, and that is going to be their recommendation. One of their recommendations also was that every publication should have a social media policy for its journalists and for all its staff. How should people conduct themselves on social media as representatives of their publications? So that is coming. It's still not defined yet. But increasingly we expect journalists to abide by what is in this code, even before it is amended.
Thank you very much, Joe. Thanks very much for your time. Thanks for your patience. And thanks for explaining this to us in a very thorough and nice manner. Thank you very much. Can I just say, there's one thing that Media 24 gets right. They have a social media policy. Thank you for that commercial. Thanks very much, everybody, for coming. I hope you enjoyed this as much. It was as useful to you as it will be to me. Thank you very much once again.